Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A man has been arrested in Florida in connection with the suspected pipe bombs that have been sent to prominent Democrats and critics of President Trump. In the last hour, police have named him as Cesar Sayoc. Today, 2 more suspicious packages were found, one of them addressed to a congressman, another to a former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. President Trump has said America must unite, as our correspondent Nick Bryant reports from Washington.
This has been a nationwide manhunt, but it appeared to end today amidst the palm trees of Florida. The federal authorities arresting a suspect in connection with the parcel bombs just north of Miami. Law enforcement officials surrounded this white van that had Trump stickers on it. The attacks have been directed against the president's detractors. As detectives covered it with tarpaulin, details emerged about the man taken into custody. He's 56 years old and was traced partly through DNA. He's been named as Cesar Sayoc, and he's registered as a Republican. This was a scene earlier on in Midtown Manhattan, where the bomb squad descended on a postal facility where the latest explosive device was found. It was sent to another prominent critic of Donald Trump, the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, and addressed to the news organization CNN just a few streets away, where he's a frequent contributor.
Welcome back to breaking news. 2 new suspicious packages.
For the second time this week, the network became part of this breaking story.
This is not going to silence the administration's critics.
The FBI had already turned its attention to Florida, where it's believed the packages were mailed from. And at this postal facility outside Miami, they found another device addressed to another Trump critic, the Democratic Senator Cory Booker. All the packages have been the same, and all of them had the return address of a prominent Democratic congresswoman who spoke out today.
We are not going to be knocked down by violence and by vitriol and by venom.
The initial response this morning from the White House was extraordinary, the president not condemning the attacks but raising questions about their timing, with vital congressional elections just 11 days away. Republicans are doing so well in early voting and at the polls, and now this bomb stuff happens and the momentum greatly slows. But in responding to news of the arrest, he tried to strike a more presidential tone.
But the bottom line is that Americans must unify, and we must show the world that we are united together in peace and love and harmony as fellow American citizens. There is no country like our country. And every day we are showing the world just how truly great we are.
But what's been striking has been the politicization of these attempted attacks and how they've become part of the partisan fight. No one has yet been injured, but they've highlighted once again the anger and hostility that's become an everyday feature of American national life. Now, Cesar Sayoc has a lengthy criminal history. He has been arrested on numerous occasions before, including one case in which he was accused of threatening to use a bomb. Now, there's a lot of attention on that white van and the stickers that were emblazoned upon it. Some were of Donald Trump, some were of Vice President Mike Pence. Reporters at the scene are also saying there was a sticker that said CNN sucks. The news organization, of course, was where 2 of the packages were addressed to. Now, the FBI believe that Cesar Sayoc is the principal suspect, but they haven't ruled out the possibility of further arrests.
Nick, thank you. Nick Bryant in Washington.
A man is now in custody in connection with a wave of parcel bombs addressed to prominent critics of President Trump, hours after 2 more suspicious packages were intercepted. Federal officers have taken away a white van plastered in what appeared to be Republican posters in the city plantation in Florida. President Trump tonight declared that political violence must never be allowed to take root. The bottom line, he said, is that Americans must unify. Here's Paul McNamara.
After 12 bombs sent to 10 targets over 4 days, US authorities finally have one suspect. 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc, according to US officials, and this morning he was arrested. Videos like this one from his own Facebook page appear to show him at multiple Trump rallies. Mr. Sayoc is reportedly a registered Republican, and US media have reported previous arrests and an extensive criminal history. After the arrest this morning, police in Plantation, Florida, focused their investigations on this truck. Political posters and stickers adorn the windows. Among the pro-Trump material, they reveal pictures of Hillary Clinton with a target on her head and a CNN sucks sticker. Both have been targets. The arrest delayed the president's appearance at this Young Black Leadership Summit by an hour.
I am pleased to inform you that law enforcement has apprehended the suspect and taken him into custody.
Applause and then a message for the nation.
We must never allow political violence to take root in America. Cannot let it happen. And I'm committed to doing everything in my power as president to stop it.
Strong words, but undermined, many argue, by far more inflammatory words throughout his relatively short political career aimed at his rivals. Mid-morning in Midtown Manhattan, and another explosive device was being removed. This one addressed to former National Intelligence Director James Clapper. Within minutes, he phoned into US network CNN to give his thoughts on the president's role in this ongoing episode.
I'm not suggesting a direct cause and effect relationship between anything that he's said or done and the distribution of these explosives. But I do think he bears some responsibility for the coarseness and uncivility of the dialogue in this country, and that he needs to remember that his words count.
Another device was discovered this morning, addressed to Trump critic and prominent Democrat Cory Booker.
There are threats in this country. People plotting. I receive enough death threats to know the reality.
The New Jersey senator joins a long list to be sent one of these pipe bombs, a list that includes former President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and former CIA Director John Brennan. Another went to the office of Florida Democrat Debbie Wasserman Schultz. This morning, she joined a chorus pleading for politics to be put aside in the pursuit of peace.
You know, this is a time when, no matter what your political persuasion is, we need to turn the volume down. We need to have a civil discourse. We need to be talking with one another.
This division, this hatred, this ugliness, it has to end. Words matter.
Other targets, though, used their words that matter to focus fire on the president. Former CIA Director John Brennan tweeted this to Donald Trump: "Look in the mirror. Your inflammatory rhetoric, insults, lies and encouragement of physical violence are disgraceful. Clean up your act. Try to act presidential." This afternoon, US officials say they have arrested their, quote, principal suspect, but more arrests could follow.
Paul McNamara reporting.
President Trump tonight called for the suspect arrested over more than a dozen package bombs that were sent to politicians and some of America's best-known liberal figures to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That, despite many suggesting the president's own words may have been the catalyst for his actions. Cesar Sayok was arrested and his van seized, much of it covered in stickers attacking many of the people and organisations who received the devices in the post.
After a week of anxiety and a wave of postal bombs, police now have their suspect. On his van, clearly visible, was a montage of pro-Trump posters. Some stickers showing the crosshairs of a sniper rifle over the faces of well-known liberal figures, and one that read, "CNN sucks." The suspect has been named as Cesar Sayok, a known Trump supporter, and seen here at the president's inauguration. He has made previous violent threats against public figures. It appears he sent at least 13 pipe bombs in the mail, the latest ones being detected today in the postal system and being removed in specialist explosive containment vehicles. The president made the announcement of the arrest this afternoon at the White House.
I am pleased to inform you that law enforcement has apprehended the suspect and taken him into custody.
He was cheered by the black business leaders he was addressing, and then this divisive president made a promise.
We must never allow political violence to take root in America. Cannot let it happen. and I'm committed to doing everything in my power as president to stop it.
But for all those words, the president stands accused of fueling much of the anger and many of the conspiracy theories coursing through American politics. For example, Trump and his supporters have long bitterly attacked Hillary Clinton, one of those targeted by SAOC. Similarly, he has regularly ridiculed and taunted CNN, another target of the bomber.
Don't worry, I don't like him either.
In fact, on the suspect's Facebook page, since taken down, there are images and a video of SAOC at Trump rallies. His political ideology can only be embarrassing for the White House.
You were hanging on the edge of your seat for that.
For others who were sent explosive devices, including this former chairwoman of the Democratic Party, this has been a traumatic week, and she is vowing she will not be intimidated.
We will never be cowed into submission by people who hate. Never. Never.
For the FBI, there is the relief of capturing the suspect and of removing a threat in the run-up to midterm congressional elections in just 11 days. But the bigger question remains about the incendiary rhetoric this president uses and its impact on both his followers and on the health of the American political debate. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
In the past hour, police in the American city of Pittsburgh say a shooting at a synagogue has caused multiple casualties. Reports suggest several people may have been killed, though this hasn't been confirmed. The shooting happened at the Tree of Life synagogue, and the gunman is thought to be in custody. Here's Richard Lister.
Heavily armed police converging on Squirrel Hill after reports that a man had opened fire in a synagogue, a peaceful suburban neighbourhood transformed in moments by a gunman. Tactical weapons units were brought in from across the city. Other officers sealed the area and began moving towards the building and its congregation as the attack continued. It is a suburb with a large Jewish population, and it seems that the synagogue was deliberately targeted. Residents, still unsure of what was happening, were ushered to safety.
Right now, we have multiple casualties. We're working the situation. It is imperative that the neighbors in the community surrounding the Tree of Life synagogue stay in their houses and shelter in place. Do not come out of your home right now. It is not safe. We'll give you an update as soon as we get one.
Police say they found a number of people sheltering in the synagogue basement who they led to safety.
My heart goes out to all these families. This should not be happening, period. It should not be happening in a synagogue. It should not be happening in our neighborhood here in Squirrel Hill.
As the area was made safe, emergency teams were able to recover the injured and the dead. The gunman is reported to have given himself up after exchanging fire with police. His motive is as yet unclear. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Dan Johnson is in Washington. Dan, what's the very latest?
Well, we know that 3 police officers were shot, bringing that suspect into custody, but it's still not clear exactly how many more people were involved in this incident. Police are still making that synagogue safe, so we don't know how many have been wounded, how many have been killed, but this is another fatal shooting incident in America. The president has tweeted his blessing to all who have been involved, but there will be questions about whether this fits the profile of a politically or religiously motivated attack. Questions that have already been asked this week after mail bombs were sent to prominent politicians and political figures. Already people asking whether this is another example of the divisive nature of American politics having a lethal outcome. Certainly there will be questions, and another reminder that even when Americans are at peace and at prayer, they are not safe.
OK, Dan, thank you. Dan Johnson there live in Washington.
A synagogue in Pittsburgh on a Saturday morning, reportedly holding a baby naming ceremony, the latest scene of a multiple shooting in America. According to local police, there are multiple casualties and the gunman has been arrested. Well, let's cross live now to Danny Isdale in Washington, D.C. Danny, what's the latest on this?
Well, Kathy, as you say, a Saturday morning here, Shabbat for the Jewish community, and indeed Sabbath day services were underway at the Tree of Life synagogue. A gunman armed with an AR-15 style rifle and multiple handguns is believed to have opened fire. We understand that suspect is now in custody, and at least 8 people, according to local media reports, have been killed. It is by far the most deadly attack on the US Jewish community on US soil in recent history here in America. And the former rabbi of this particular synagogue has said just in the past hour that he never spoke to his congregation about what to do in the event of a shooting here in their congregation, but it was something that he had thought about doing, and he thought about it because, quote, there's a lot of anti-Semitism out there, there's a lot of hate out there. Indeed, President Trump just in the past hour has said something along similar lines. He said it is a terrible thing what is going on with hate in this country. Anya Pop has this report.
Right now, those are officers that are moving down Murray Avenue, SWAT team members rather.
Armed police surround the Tree of Life synagogue in the US city of Pittsburgh. A baby naming ceremony celebrating the start of life interrupted by a shooter. Local media are reporting 8 people have died, although police are yet to confirm that.
The suspect in the shooting is in custody. We have multiple casualties inside the synagogue. We have 3 officers who have been shot. And at this time, we have no more information because we are still clearing the building and trying to figure out if the situation is safe, if there are any more threats inside the building.
This part of Pittsburgh is the hub of the Jewish community. Local media are reporting the shooter entered the building shouting anti-Semitic slurs. Saturday is the holiest day of the week in Judaism. The synagogue would have been at its busiest when the shooter entered.
I know all these people. These are my community. This is my regular Saturday morning thing. I'm thinking for myself, I was thinking of heading up to the service early this morning, and I would have been in there.
I have a bunch of friends that live really close, so it's just been a whole day of just getting in contact with people and just trying to figure out which of my friends go to that synagogue and who lives nearby.
President Trump said the situation is devastating, but that it had little to do with gun laws.
If they had some kind of a protection inside the temple, maybe it could have been a very much different situation. They didn't. And he was able to do things that unfortunately he shouldn't have been able to do.
The president told reporters the violence has to stop.
Well, what happens now is an obvious investigation into the motivation, the impetus, searching of the suspect's home and social media accounts, whether there were signs that there could be co-conspirators or any further threats. That is an all too familiar routine here in the US. President Trump said himself tonight, you know, we see this type of shooting so many times for so many years, and it's a great shame. It feels particularly so at this moment in the US. We are leading up to the midterm elections, not far to go now. The vote is November 6th, and the tone of the campaigning has been nasty, it's been uncivilised. Indeed, just in these past days, the nation's been gripped by the spectacle of pipe bombs being intercepted by authorities as they've been addressed to critics of President Donald Trump. So that's all playing out as this happens as well. President Trump had called for calm and unity because of the pipe bombs incidents. He will adopt that tone again in his events over the course of tonight. He has 2 further rallies. He'll be asked about gun control. He has already spoken about perhaps the need to arm guards in synagogues, mosques, other religious institutions. He will also be asked about the threat of domestic terrorism. When you look at the pipe bombs and you look at this event today, it is a White House that usually prefers to speak about terrorism in terms of a threat from overseas.
Danny, thanks very much.
11 people have been killed in the American city of Pittsburgh after a gunman opened fire in a synagogue. 4 police officers were among the injured. President Trump tonight said it was a wicked act of mass murder. Many others are describing it as a hate crime. The suspect has been arrested and is in custody, as Martin Stew now reports.
Heavily armed SWAT teams on the usually quiet suburban streets of Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At 10 a.m, a gunman armed with an assault rifle and 2 pistols opened fire inside the Tree of Life synagogue. Inside, up to 100 people gathered for a baby's naming ceremony. Responding teams shot and arrested him. but not before he'd killed at least 11 and wounded 6 others, including 4 police officers.
This is the most horrific crime scene I've seen in 22 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Members of the Tree of Life Synagogue, conducting a peaceful service in their place of worship, were brutally murdered by a gunman targeting them simply because of their faith.
American news agencies say this is a picture of the man in hospital under arrest. Robert Bowers, a 46-year-old with a history of posting anti-Semitic comments on social media. His most recent ominously signed off, "I'm going in."
There's a lot of anti-Semitism out there, and there's a lot of hate out there. You can just look in the news every day, and it's sobering that it's touched our community.
I know all these people. These are my community. This is my regular Saturday morning thing.
President Trump has called the attack a wicked act of mass murder carried out by a lone gunman.
If there was an armed guard inside the temple, they would have been able to stop him. Maybe there would have been nobody killed except for him.
Police have now stepped up patrols of other Jewish centres across the country. Too late for Squirrel Hill, a community which will forever be scarred by one man's violence. Martin Stew, ITV News.
A week of mail bombs ends in an arrest. Last count, it was 13 packages sent with explosive devices to the most prominent opponents of President Trump and everything he stands for. From George Soros to Robert De Niro, and today a Democratic Senator, Cory Booker, and a former National Security Advisor, James Clapper. But the FBI and New York police have a suspect from Florida, 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc, described with some understatement as a political partisan. President Trump was in ebullient mood when talking about it, addressing a group of young black leaders in the White House earlier.
But the bottom line is that Americans must unify, and we must show the world that we are united together in peace and love and harmony as fellow American citizens. There is no country like our country, and every day we are showing the world just how truly great we are.
Well, was it inevitable that the familiar, poisonous and tribal public discourse in the US would prompt attempted violence? It's not the first episode there since President Trump came to power. There was a fatality in Charlottesville over a year ago, and thankfully no one died in this latest campaign, but it has marked an unnerving new low in US politics, less than 2 weeks before national midterm elections. And what about over here? It was over 2 years ago that the MP Joe Cox was murdered. But given the post-referendum anger we've been living through, should we brace ourselves for more? The US this week almost united in condemnation of the parcel bombs, but any truce in the verbal fighting was short-lived.
She hired Hillary Clinton's attorneys to cover it up.
A crowd on Wednesday was still shouting "lock her up" about Hillary Clinton on the day she had been sent one of the devices. The Liberal side criticised the president. CNN said his anti-media tirades created the conditions for this. He fought back in familiar style.
The media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories. Have to do it.
And again in a tweet last night. To paraphrase, they criticise me, but say I shouldn't criticise them. Basically, violence this week has been just another thing to argue about. The suspect arrested today is perhaps unsurprisingly a Trump supporter.
Trump and that, the next president of the United States.
But he has some history, reports of previous jail, charges for theft and drugs. If he is the man, it would appear that his case couldn't be more different to purposeful or organised violence. It's pure hate. Of course, there have been divided and violent times before. The assassinations of the 60s come to mind, or the protests then that ended in bloody fights. The observation was that violence can be infectious. Which brings us to the UK. Are the conditions here ripe? The language is getting more extreme. This week's inappropriate metaphor is a good example. Do violent words create violent behaviour? And as the court appearance of Tommy Robinson this week showed, the polarisation is extreme.
No matter what happens today, I've already won.
There's rage on both sides. Are these the conditions for the rhetoric to go violent here? Well, on the day that the arrest was made over in the US, we thought we'd stand back and take a look at the danger of violence increasing. This is not to suggest it has ever gone away and may now return. Plenty of people have experienced violence or racism or other forms of hate or are victims of Islamist terror, for example. But should we expect more of this in that liberal, potentially, versus populist domain? Well, I'm joined by Kim Leadbeater, the sister of Joe Cox. She's the chair of More in Common, the charity set up to remember and celebrate Joe's legacy. Matthew Goodwin is author and writer of National Populism, The Revolt Against Liberal Democracies. Holly Turner joins us from Washington, D.C., a Republican strategist who has worked a year in the Trump administration. And from New York, Professor Joanne Freeman is an academic and an expert in American political violence. A very good evening to you all. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to start, if I could, with the American experience. So I'll focus on you two, if I might. And Joanne, I wonder if you can, maybe reach back for comparisons. Does this feel like an historic point at which the US is in, or would you say this is, a blip or nothing remarkable?
I would not say it's nothing remarkable. I would say, I suppose, that in some ways it echoes moments from the past. There have been any number of moments, and certainly the 1960s was one of them, when it's very clear that the nation feels like it's shifting course, or that some decision is being made that's going to push the nation in one direction or another. I think those are moments when Americans of all kinds realize that the stakes are high, and it makes politics fraught and polarized and divisive. There have been a number of them throughout American history. It's very clear that we're in another one of these moments, like the 1960s, the 1850s before the Civil War, the late 1790s when the government was first starting. We're at another one of those moments, but it isn't exactly the same. The conditions are different, and part of the difference, I do think, is the particular president who we have now and some of the language he chooses to use.
Joanne, is it the case that violence begets more violence, that it becomes normalized, so one lot do something, then the other lot want to do it, or the language becomes more excitable, and that kind of, if you like, debases the whole process? Should we worry that there's a dynamic here that may lead somewhere?
Well, I think, a certain kind of rhetoric leads to emotion, and that kind of emotion spreads more emotion. I mean, there is a contagion. There's a reason why campaigning rhetoric is so extreme. You're trying to rouse emotion, and you're trying to rouse action in people. So it's supposed to be contagious, and so I do think that that's a risk.
Yeah. Holly, how seriously should we take this? Because some people have said this week, look, one mad person or bad person in 350 million, let's not get overexcited about it. Where are you on that scale? Because some on the left are saying, hang on a minute, you're trying to play down the violence on your side.
Absolutely not. I mean, it is a very serious situation, and I think the president has responded appropriately. But I think it's important to look at the situation for what it is, and we talk about, does more violence beget more violence? And I think what you're seeing is, do we need to suppress speech to prevent this type of violence? And I don't think that's the solution here. I think let people feel that they're heard. They've been criticized. We have Hillary Clinton calling people deplorables. We have Democrat congressmen telling people to get up in the face of people that they disagree with. So I think what's going to matter most here and what's going to turn the tide is people are going to feel like when they go and vote that their voice has been heard, and when people feel the freedom to express themselves, then they don't have to resort to violence. But I think also, the actions of one cannot be contributed to the words of others, and this is a country of personal responsibility, and we cannot blame others for actions that some people take.
But can I just push you a little bit on the language? Because you can be heard, can't you, without using violent language or in any way insinuating that your opponents are out to actually destroy the system or destroy the country. I mean, you can have an opponent without undermining your faith in their legitimacy as a presence in the discourse, can't you?
You can, but I think that the emotions that people are feeling, they should feel free to express those. And to both sides, and I will say to both sides, feel very emotional about what is happening, and both sides feel that the other side is going to destroy what they believe in. So it's important to let people express themselves, and obviously violence is not the answer. So we need to be sure we let everyone have a chance to express themselves. And the president has condemned these actions. He has not called for people to behave violently or to take actions. He's asked them to go and vote. He says, if you support what I stand for, then go and vote. And that's the direction that he's given the American people.
Let's come into the debate in the UK. And Kim, I'm fascinated by what you think about violent language, violent metaphors, angry language, and the link to violence.
I think it would be extremely naive to accept that there is no link between a violent narrative and the risk of violent action. And as a family who've been victims of that in the worst possible way, I think it would be wholly unrealistic to not see a connection. I would also not be naive enough to think that, you know, every single person is going to want to take action based on this narrative. That would be wrong. But actually, as we know to our cost, it only takes one person.
Right.
And
it
that's
can be
one
quite
person too many.
An unsettled person or a person with certain flakiness who can really be riled up. And
yeah, I mean, there are people who have got concerns about our society. There are people who've got concerns about issues in our community, and what we should be doing is trying to understand those concerns and work with them to alleviate those concerns, rather than encouraging those concerns and using language that is potentially going to raise those concerns to a higher level, where the end result could potentially be violence.
When Joe was killed, everyone said we need to change. Have we?
No, unfortunately not. There was a real sense when Joe was murdered across the political divide, across the political spectrum, things need to change, you know, and there was a huge sense of shock and dismay amongst politicians and amongst the country as a whole. And there was a sense there was a moment there where things would change, and actually, sadly, tragically, I think we're now in an even worse place than we were.
Well, the country is much more divided, isn't it? Matthew, you were right about the divisions, the rise of populism, all the things that have been, to some extent, taking political establishment by surprise over the last few years. Do you see any reason to believe conditions that have led to some violence in the US could lead to more violence here?
Well, we're not as polarised as the US. I'm worried about the state of the US. I mean, just to give you one stat that I find really troubling, more than 90% of Americans now approve of marriage between different racial or ethnic groups, but around 30 to 40% disapprove of the idea of their kids marrying somebody from the other political tribe. Those kinds of stats, to me, are very worrying. Those are the building blocks for something a bit deeper. Could it happen in the UK? I think we've always been different. We have, in the post-war period, had what's called a civic culture. Whether that's going on or not, I think, is an open question. But there will always be the isolated loner who seeks to break through. Look at Norway and Breivik, very consensual political culture, but even there you had somebody who felt that he had to take violence in order to get his concerns onto the agenda. Is there a profile, basically,
here? I mean, is it, we don't want to be too simplistic about it all.
There is a profile, and this chap seems to fit that profile. Middle-aged men, typically low-educated, often not connected to civil society.
Quite unsettled and
a history of mental abuse or illness, drug and alcohol problems. In research in Germany, a lot has shown that profile is pretty consistent, and in the UK, obviously, we've seen that profile too. The question is, how do you respond? How do democracies respond to this? And particularly for the US, I would say, how do you prop up that moderate middle and actually push back against this polarisation?
That's a really good question. So, look, let me just go around all four of you and ask, what do you do to lower the temperature, to calm things down? And we'll start with you, Joanne, because you can give us historic examples of where it's been successfully dealt with. Fairly brief all, but Joanne, what should be done, other than just saying, can't we all be nice to each other, which obviously doesn't work?
No, that's not going to work. And I'm going to say something that many others have said, and that's sort of beneath the conversation that we're having here. And that is that words matter. They matter profoundly. They inspire emotion. And although you certainly can't blame what we're calling, a loner, one person's actions, the fact of the matter is the words of the President of the United States matter more than other words. That is the elected leader, and I totally agree that this next election and the one after that will be a public choice. The public will have registered what they want, and that matters deeply. But when the President of the United States is saying things that are extreme, and that the sort of person who took action, it inspires that kind of person to take action, that's not optimal. It would be good if the rhetoric, tone down the rhetoric. Don't make it so much of an us and them, they are evil, we are not. That's not a useful way to speak at all, and that's a dangerous way, I think, for a president
Okay,
to
so
talk.
Holly, I don't know, where would you go, Holly, if you wanted to try and improve the situation? Your president obviously has his way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, listen, no matter what the president says, the left is going to blame him for things. It doesn't matter what he says. They're always going to say that he is the cause.
Right, so what would you do? So what would you do to improve things?
Listen, people have to understand maybe words do matter, but they are just words. So maybe the better step is to say, hey, let's learn to have discussions and let's learn to have ideas that are different from each other and be okay with that. That's the real problem. When we say words matter, what that says is, well, you can't say anything that is different from what I believe, or else I'm going to be offended and hurt and I might do something bad. The better option is to teach our children and teach in families to have differences of opinion and to be okay with that. That's where the problem is right now. It's not that they're extreme. Yeah, it's that they can't be okay with having differences.
Not taking too much of it.
Exactly.
Let me come to my two British guests. I'll go with you first then, Matthew. I'll give Kim the last word. But what would you do to improve things? You've expressed it as a goal. And
Well, I don't think there's one sort of silver bullet, but the marketplace of ideas, that heart of democracy where we all bring different views and opinions into that marketplace, and we talk and we discuss and we argue, but we bargain and we compromise, that is what is collapsing. So we need to think about what institutions, what mechanisms can we put into place that support that marketplace of ideas. And that means mixing our friendship groups and our social networks. It means having better political leadership. It means starting early at school level and university level and making sure people are exposed to different perspectives. And in cases like this as well, it just means, making sure we're giving security services and police enough resources to do their job, to be frank.
OK, last word, Kim.
I would agree with everything that Matthew said. I would agree with what Joanne said. I would probably slightly disagree with what Holly said. I'm all for freedom of speech. I'm all for freedom of expression. But there is a line. And it's great to debate. It's great to discuss. It's great, that's what politics is about.
But I think
that's what life's about.
Holly thinks her supporters, or the president's supporters, have felt like they've been shut down, and so they need they need to be able to express their anger with the system or with the establishment.
Fine, but express it in a civilised manner. Don't express it talking about stabbing and shooting people. That's a totally different narrative to talking about disagreeing with somebody and not, not being on the same page as them politically. So I think, we have an expression in Yorkshire, if you haven't got anything good to say, keep your gob shut. And actually, I think sometimes there's some truth in that. If you haven't got anything that's going to enhance the debate and move things forward in a positive manner, maybe just don't say anything for a while.
I think that's a good point on which to finish. Look, thank you all very much indeed.